Hi there, blogging heads. This is Betsy Woodruff. The show is Woodruff and Strauss. I'm a reporter with Slate, and I'm here with Jim Newell. We're going to be talking about national politics and election fun. Jim, can you tell us a little bit about yourself?
Hi, I'm Jim Newell. I am a politics writer for Salon. Before that, I was a freelancer for a few years. Before that, I worked at Gawker. So, here we are. Let's talk politics stuff.
Cool. Awesome. So, Jim, you had a story that I haven't read all of, but looks really interesting from like the top two-thirds about soon-to-be Majority Leader Mitch McConnell and all the really exciting, fun stuff that's going to be happening for him on the Hill regarding everyone's favorite conversation topic, Obamacare. So what's the elevator summary of your perspective on that?
Well, there's basically an insistence coming from outside conservative groups, some more conservative elements of the party saying that Mitch McConnell should use the budget reconciliation process to pass a repeal of Obamacare. Therefore, you'd only need 51 votes instead of 60. And I don't really understand why there's so much pressure to do this because it can just get vetoed, and they don't have two-thirds majorities in either the House or the Senate to get vetoed. So I'm sort of wondering why there's this insistence. And I'm just wondering if this is sort of a larger proxy for, trying to get Mitch McConnell to be as conservative as he can be. If this is just a test to sort of see his devotion to the cause. There are other things that you can do. You could probably pass a repeal of the medical device tax or some other elements of the party on the margin or of the law on the margins, and those would probably get 60 votes. There are a lot of Democratic senators who are in favor of that. And you could probably pressure Obama into signing a repeal of those, but you can't pressure him into signing a repeal of his signature healthcare law. So it just I'm
Rhino.
Yeah, I know.
Why aren't you making DC listen?
I know.
What are the main outside groups on that? Is Heritage Action talking about that?
Heritage Action, yeah, and Senate Conservatives Funds. And I don't know, they were really behind Matt Bevin in the primary, so I don't know if they just have a bone to pick.
Yeah.
But I don't know, maybe it's just the larger pool just trying to keep the pressure on McConnell.
I think this also, what's important here is which specific groups are pushing for it, because Heritage Action has significant clout only because their membership base is huge. Because Heritage, even though it's taken a bit of a drubbing in the last few years, is still probably the number one conservative policy shop in DC as far as financial backing, clout, power on the Hill, ability to influence the House Republican caucus. And if Heritage Action is saying you need to use reconciliation to repeal Obamacare, that's a big deal. I haven't talked to those guys in a while, just because I've been doing campaign stuff. So that's interesting.
Did they lose any of their clout in the last year though? Because they seem to key vote everything, and then there were a lot that were worried. Like they recommended a vote against the VA bill last year, and it passed like 420 to 1 or something in the House. So
yeah, I think they did. Only because they did key vote everything, like you said. For people watching Blogging Heads who don't know what key vote means, key voting is when, so you have these outside groups like Heritage Action. Heritage Action is sort of the lobbying arm or a lobbying parallel to the Heritage Foundation. If the Heritage Foundation is Peter Pan, Heritage Action is the shadow bouncing all over the place doing its own thing.
Exactly, yeah.
And key voting is when Heritage Action and Heritage Action keeps a scorecard. Lots and lots of these outside groups keep scorecards. Basically, every outside advocacy group is going to have one. Planned Parenthood has one, NARAL has one, all the way down the line. Every organization has these where they say, this lawmaker gets an A+ from us on our issues. Well, Heritage Action scorecard is very important because a huge number of conservative grassroots activists who always vote, who love voting, and who call their legislators and who are very involved, take the Heritage Action scorecard as gospel, fairly or unfairly. And because of that, if lawmakers score badly on the Heritage Action scorecard, they get angry phone calls, people get mad at them, they have to worry about a primary challenger. So key voting means that a certain vote influences how people will score on the scorecard. So Heritage Action has started key voting everything, like you said, and there's a point where lawmakers just kind of throw their hands up and say, I can't vote against all this stuff. And also I think a big question is how each individual vote affects the scorecard, you know? Like,
yeah,
because there are some votes, that heritage key votes, that are more important than others, but I don't know if each of them individually counts as like 1 point for the scorecard, or it's complicated. But yeah, I think they've key voted so much stuff that eventually lawmakers just say, whatever.
Yeah, I mean, if you pull the threat on every single piece of legislation, then it's something that you can just sort of discard a little bit. But I mean, yeah, I don't think you can completely throw them out of the window.
Definitely not. Definitely
but
not.
I don't know. We'll see if this reconciliation thing sort of goes away once everyone sort of gets their head around. But I mean, one thing I was writing was just the language they're using to describe it. It's like, you know, they're saying Mitch McConnell needs to repeal Obamacare with 51 votes. And so I mean, they can vote to repeal Obamacare with 51 votes, and they can pass a bill, and it'll get vetoed. So
it's
I don't know.
Definitely a lot of pressure on poor old Mitch.
I know, poor Mitch. Poorest guy in the world.
Seriously, though, like, let's be real.
And he's got other stuff on his plate, you know, like they're going to have to talk about government funding in the next couple of weeks.
Immigration. They have to figure out if they're confirming the new AG nominee. It's gonna be fun. I think another important note here is talking about Senate Conservatives Fund and them pushing for reconciliation, for repealing Obamacare through reconciliation, which is not a thing that you can actually do.
Yeah.
Senate Conservatives Fund is such a fun group because they are really closely allied with Jim DeMint, former senator who's president of Heritage, as you know, obviously. And Mitch McConnell hates them. Well, Mitch McConnell probably hates SCF more than he hates Democrats. I would think definitely more. Because they supported his primary challenger. So if SCF is going, Mitch McConnell, you need to repeal Obamacare. I mean, I imagine Mitch McConnell is sort of doing the Adele back and forth laugh over that, right? Ha 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 ha. Because
well, that's why I wonder if this is just some of these groups who, Mitch McConnell famously went to war with or whatever, just trying to needle him a little bit. But in general, I'm sort of just interested in the amount of funny business that McConnell is going to let people get away with, because in his press conference after the election, he said, I can tell you, right here, there's not going to be a government shutdown. There's not going to be a debt default. And, I think that's a pretty good bet. They tried it. It didn't work before, at least for a government shutdown.
Right.
But, I mean, there's going to be a lot of pressure from his right and a lot of pressure from the more moderate senators who are up for re-election in blue states in the next cycle. So I don't know. It'll be interesting to see how much she puts the down on.
I think another thing that's important here is the fact that Republicans sort of overpromised in the midterms. I mean, since 2010, basically every Republican candidate who has beat either a Republican incumbent in a primary or a Democrat in a general election has run on repealing Obamacare. They talk about that all day, every day. I talked with Reince Priebus back in February about what their big picture goals were for the midterms, and he was like, if you ask me what I'm putting in my coffee, I'm going to say Obamacare. If you ask me what day of the week it is, I'm going to say Obamacare. Their plan was talk about Obamacare all day, every day, put it in every single ad, run against it as hard as you possibly can. And that worked because the law, especially when you call it Obamacare, has very bad, bad reviews. But the problem now is Republicans run Congress. They've got the Senate, they have and the House, and they aren't going to be able to repeal it because they don't have 2/3 majorities, and it's not physically possible. So the question is, given that they've promised to repeal Obamacare for the last 4 years, combine that with the fact that they can't, at what point does the Republican base just start jumping ship? And at what point do you have groups like Senate Conservatives Fund saying, the Rhino Republican establishment lied to you, Obamacare is still here, who are you going to get mad at now? And I think that could potentially be an issue for a long time for them.
Well, yeah, this whole thing with reconciliation, it was actually floated in the closing weeks of the campaign they were saying, like, will McConnell, we have the spine or whatever to repeal Obamacare reconciliation. And he was giving an interview, and he said, like, well, we don't have 60 votes. It's going to be hard to get law while Obama's still president, which is just a statement of fact, Mm-hmm. But then everyone raised a ruckus about it, and then he his spokesman put out a statement saying, like, we will do everything we can to repeal Obamacare, including using reconciliation. So, I mean, you have, whenever someone does try to say, like, well, we can't really do it when Obama's president because he's president and he's not going to repeal it, then you get pushback, and they're they're just calling you riot, sellout, blah blah blah.
Yeah, I think the other important thing here too is you mentioned the medical device tax and how there is bipartisan support for repealing it, as a component of the Affordable Care Act. But the problem with that, of course, is that if Republicans start chipping off little sectors of it, then the medical device industry is no longer going to be on board with them for pushing for a full repeal. So it's kind of, as soon as they give any individual sector of their coalition what they want, that sector is no longer going to be on board with them for full repeal, and they actually lose support. So it kind of
that's a really smart point, and it's that sort of the conclusion of my article is saying. I think there's in general a reluctance to even go at the margins of the law and start reforming it, because once you start reforming it, it's going to look like you've sort of accepted it,
right,
and then you're just going to give up on repeal a little bit. So
right,
I don't know. And then there's this whole Supreme Court challenge that's coming, which may just force the legislative fix, and then we'll have some real. So
it's so interesting because it's incredibly easy for Republicans to talk about on the campaign trail and in commercials, but incredibly difficult for them to talk about once they have significant power on the Hill and actually have the ability to make legislative moves on the issue.
Yeah.
And part of that is just it's a complicated bill. It's not something you can sum up in 30 seconds. I mean, it's not something you can easily explain on a Sunday show. And I think the gap between what Republican voters think is possible when it comes to Obamacare and what Republicans on the Hill and Republicans on K Street think is possible is enormous. And that strikes me as a crisis waiting to happen.
Yeah. I mean, it's, they would need, I mean, they could do it potentially in 2017, if they have the White House. And there's a good chance they'll keep the Senate probably in 2016, but it's going to be close.
Yeah.
It's going to be close. I don't know.
Yeah.
But then it'll to see if once the numbers are actually willing to go through with it, because they'll need something there in his making. But I don't know. That's in a couple of years. So
down the road, whatever.
Down the road. That's in like a million years.
Yeah, we're not even have to worry about it. Getting way ahead of ourselves. To get through like the next month, right? Without enormous crisis. So good. Any other important details? Fun stuff about reconciliation and Obamacare. Closing thoughts on that topic.
Yeah, the only other thing is, like, even if they did try to do it through repeal or through reconciliation, you need the rules of reconciliation has to be something that decreases the deficit. So if you're repealing a bunch of taxes, and that's going to increase the deficit. So they might have a CDO problem with that, even if they choose to do it. But
that's interesting.
Yeah.
Do you know a lot about static versus dynamic scoring? Have you followed that whole thing?
Yeah, a little bit.
Can you give the 30-second explanation that a fifth grader would understand of what static scoring is, what dynamic scoring is, and why there's disagreement on it? No problem if you can't do that, because I know it's really complicated. But if you can, I'd be interested.
Yeah, it's when the Congressional Budget Office does its look at how a bill will affect the budget. Right now, they use, for the most part, something called static scoring. So if you increase tax rates by this much, then it will bring in this much revenue based on existing projections of economic growth. Mm-hmm. Dynamic scoring tries to take more into account the effect that the law will have on economic growth in that projection. So this is something that's favorable to supply-side economics, because you can say, we'll cut tax rates, but the economy will grow so fast that we won't end up losing any revenue.
Mm-hmm.
So,
or if you raise taxes, that could theoretically affect revenues, businesses move overseas, et cetera, et cetera.
Yeah, and vice versa, yeah.
And Paul Ryan's big thing is going to be trying to move it towards doing dynamic scoring, right? Does the CBO right now do static scoring?
Yes, they do. I think it's a bit more of a gray than a black and white. So they will take maybe a couple of small things into account, but they're pretty conservative about, not making too many projections based on sort of certain ideologies, So,
mm-hmm.
but there's a tax reform thing, because if you want to, cut tax rates or whatever, and that may project a revenue shortfall, then you can, suggest that there's going to be more economic growth from that, so that you get your bill with a good CBO score.
Right.
So,
there you go. That's a really good explanation. Thanks.
Okay. Good.
That was lots of small words and short sentences. So
okay. Awesome. It usually takes me until 4 in the afternoon to sort of get my head around it.
I understand the general CBO scoring debate, but I'm terrible at explaining it. So I doff my hat to you.
Right. There are probably a million good articles about online that are better than me just sort of being like, oh,
right.
God. Well,
the thing is, I don't want to spend 20 minutes reading an article on CBO scoring.
Yeah. You don't?
I aspire to be that kind of person. I should want to do that.
Yeah. What kind of PR are you, endless commentary about CBO scoring?
I'm sorry, there are Taylor Swift videos I need to watch.
True. Yeah.
Cool. So the next thing to talk about, and I'm so excited to hear your take on this, is what the midterms mean for Hillary Clinton. And I think maybe the first question here is just looking at, now that we've had sort of a week to calm down and recombobulate and parse a lot of the midterm election outcomes, why Democrats did so horribly and what that means for the next couple of years and for the post-Obama Democratic Party, if you will.
Yeah, well, there have been, about 3 or 4 million explanations for why they did so poorly. You can't overlook the difficulty of the math. It doesn't explain everything. Obviously, it was, at least in the Senate, it was a terrible place to be running. But then, also, they lost, a lot of these governors they were really hoping to win.
Mm-hmm.
I think you have to look a little bit more individually. Like in Illinois, Pat Quinn, Democrat who lost, he's been unpopular for a very long time, even though that's a blue state that made him vulnerable. In Maryland, where I'm from, I was sort of looking at this race, for months because I wasn't sure if Democrats were taking it for granted. And Anthony Brown, the Democratic gubernatorial candidate, who was Martin O'Malley's lieutenant governor, I think there was actually in Maryland a real revolt against some of the tax increases the last few years. Mm-hmm. So that's going to cause some problems for Martin O'Malley if he didn't have enough problems already. But
you're not buying O'Malley Mentum?
Not quite yet. I would like to see a little more, evidence, a few more data points to suggest that it's a real thing.
but he looks presidential.
He does. Plays the guitar, He
loves the War of 1812.
That's true. Yeah.
What Ohio soccer mom wouldn't immediately get on board?
I know. He's ideal, isn't he? But so I think you do have to look at that. But then there was also just there wasn't really much of a message from the Democrats. I'm not going to go out there and say, they needed to be more progressive or something like that, because I think they need to do something, though, other than just,
You don't think condoms will be banned as a compelling message?
No, I think, I don't know if that was a very credible threat. But yeah, on the economy, it was the minimum wage, which I approve of a minimum wage increase, but it's not pretty clearly a central economic message.
I think the other thing on the minimum wage is Tuesday night was a disaster for Democrats trying to make that an issue for them, because it just showed that people can have a minimum wage hike and also can vote for Republicans, since the easiest way to raise the minimum wage is by ballot initiatives.
Exactly. That's what I was thinking. I was looking at, Arkansas, where Pryor lost by about 8 million points when it was all said and done. But the minimum wage increase passed. So
Alaska? Did Alaska pass one?
Yeah, Alaska did too.
And it looks like we're going to have a Republican in the next race.
if you're in a red state, but you vote Republican, but you like minimum wage increase, that was a perfect opportunity to have both. So,
right. And if you're a Democrat trying to say you need to vote for Democratic Party candidates so the minimum wage will go up, you're factually inaccurate because it was totally doable for people to vote for Republican candidates and also to vote for minimum wage hikes. It's like that's practically neutered as an issue for the Democratic Party.
I think they really took on to the minimum wage so much because they thought it could be a wedge issue, but it was sort of a trap because, you have most Republican candidates saying they're not in favor of minimum wage increases. So Democrats, saw how well it polled, they could just beat them over the head with that. But it just sort of leaves you then spending a whole election cycle talking about what is, sort of a side issue to a certain extent.
Right. And I think also it was not perceived as a holistic way of solving the country's economic woes.
Right. So it's that and typical identity politics and scary Republicans, are going to come in and eat your heads or whatever if you don't vote for them. And it just didn't work. And I worry that now we're starting to already see pieces. There was another one by, for what it's worth, Richard Cohen in the Washington Post today. But another, sort of thing with being like, Democrats, you need Hillary Clinton now or you're done. And that may be true to a certain, at least for the next election. But if Hillary's going to run sort of on inevitability and, the historic nature of her campaign and a couple of economic side issues, I don't know, maybe she could win, maybe she would lose in a general election, but it really doesn't help the party in the long term.
Jim, what do you think, because I primarily cover Republicans and conservatives, like those are people that I talk to, that's my, my beat, sort of. I assume you're slightly better sourced with liberals than I am. What do you think? Do you think there's any Hillary fatigue on the left? And not just in sort of your very progressive, anti-war world, if you will. But do people think are people tired of hearing about Hillary? Are they tired of thought pieces? Is there a point where the inevitability argument starts backfiring?
I mean, I think at some point in the cycle, it's like a 60-point gap now, her lead and, primary, these early primaries. And that's just naturally going to tighten a little bit, and then we'll have a wave of think pieces about how she's, done or whatever. Mm-hmm. But I think she'll probably pull it off. I do think that actually people in, urban, progressive places who may be tired of Hillary may underestimate the support that she has in other parts of the Democratic Party. She has very high approval ratings among Democrats overall, and I think there are places where people, do buy into this thing that she's the savior of the party. But who knows? I mean, we'll see as time goes on. I just, the press just gets insane, when Clinton starts running things. Even when she was doing her book tour, everyone was just insane over every word she said. So I certainly have a little bit of fatigue already, just because it's going to be I don't really know what we're going to learn from her. Yeah.
And I think that's a good point, too, about what a Hillary candidacy would mean long-term for the Democratic Party in terms of ideas and new policy proposals and sort of big picture ideological movement in that party.
Yeah.
How would that theoretically be a problem, do you think?
Well, I think if the party could just sort of admit that it's in a bad state and then have, 10 people running and trying to come up with new ways to address people and seeing which ideas poll the best, then that could sort of over time filter through the rest of the party and into state legislatures. But right now it's just going to be all about getting Hillary Clinton elected. Mm-hmm. And so, it's going to be there's not going to be a whole lot of candid discussion, I don't think. I mean, you look at what happened to Republicans in 2008, they sort of admitted that they were in a bad state, and suddenly you had all these new people showing up. Now they control 70 state legislatures or whatever.
They're individual chambers.
Yeah. Yes, individual chambers. Right. Yeah, yeah. There are
100.
Yeah, 1 million states.
Yeah, I think that's the most important thing about this election. In retrospect, I think is going to be the fact that Republicans have locked up state houses. And there's still a couple they can still flip. They didn't get the Kentucky Assembly, right? I think Democrats still have that one.
Yeah.
They didn't get the Iowa Senate, which is a big deal because if they had gotten it, then Branstad would have been able to pass pro-life legislation, probably like Texas-style abortion laws. So Democrats keeping the Iowa Senate is a very big deal. But both chambers of the West Virginia legislature are now controlled by Republicans. It's hard to imagine a Democrat winning a gubernatorial race in West Virginia in the next cycle. Certainly possible, but it's going to be tough.
Yeah, I mean, like, of all the states where Obama's approval ratings are low, I mean, it's like in the 20s. You know, I mean, it's like 30 somewhere, or like around 40 in some of these other difficult states. But yeah, I mean, you look, that's why West Virginia wasn't in any competitive as a Senate race this year. So
yeah. And was Keith Judd, is that the inmate who gave Obama a run for his money in the 2012 primary?
I can't fully remember his name, but yeah, there was a guy who ran against Obama, in 2012, and he won something like 40% of the Democratic primary vote.
Who's currently incarcerated in the federal prison system.
Yeah. It was a populist campaign, you know.
Keith Judd for the people.
Yeah.
Man, amazing. I think this is very interesting. I think, obviously there's lots to be said criticizing congressional Republicans' governing agenda, voting like 40 million times to repeal Obamacare in the House, not having any sort of realistic, passable immigration reform plan. But I think it's instructive to sort of contrast where Republicans are in terms of new policy ideas with where Democrats are. And I think part of the reason that the state houses are so important is because in these state legislatures, Republicans can actually try new things and they can test drive different policies they want to put in place. We've seen this in Texas with prison reform, where Rick Perry and Republicans in the state legislature dramatically changed how that state handles incarceration, lowered incarceration rates, lowered recidivism rates, lowered crime rates. And they're able to export that to other states, like South Carolina. I think Georgia might have looked at some sort of Texas-style prison reform. That's a huge deal. And that's not something that's explicitly conservative, but that's the kind of things that conservatives get to do when they're in power. Obviously, you have tax cuts in Kansas. They basically cut all the taxes. And this election cycle, those guys got reelected. You have everything in North Carolina. You have voter ID, abortion stuff. I think, did North Carolina do tax reform?
I'm not sure.
I'm not sure if they did. But part of the reason like these state legislatures are so important is that Republicans can test drive new stuff. They can test drive school choice, like in Arizona, charter schools and vouchers. And this is what state governments are supposed to do, right? Laboratories of democracy, try out new policy ideas, see if they work at the state level, and then potentially you can export them to other states, or you can talk about them nationally. So it's almost like Republicans have a tiny little think tank in every state that they control, not to mention the actual state-level think tanks that do policy work there. And that's very helpful for them. I think Democrats don't really have that. It's not like they're going to talk about Illinois, like, look, hey, we ran the show in Illinois. You should vote for National Democrats.
Yeah, I mean, they have that to a certain extent, in places like Maryland and Massachusetts. And they passed a lot of liberal legislation, and now there may be a little bit of backlash. I don't think in Massachusetts and Maryland, where they tried a lot of stuff, there was, they've each had Democratic governors for 8 years, so maybe they just want something a little different. I wouldn't say that those, the great projects were complete failures. And you also look at a state like Connecticut, which is the best, probably, since Daniel Malloy had one of the best progressive agendas, and he got reelected. And, it was close, but he got reelected. So, yeah, it's a bit of a mixed bag. But, yeah, now they're not going to have as much room to try additional things.
So what do you think is the most fertile ground for Democrats to sort of become the party of ideas again? Like, what are the areas where Democrats can really capitalize on issues that are strong for them?
Well, I don't know. I think the area that they need to develop ideas on is they need an economic message, because they have they talk a lot about inequality, but I don't necessarily see anything that's going to shift that. I mean, they're not talking about, except at the margins, they're not talking about expanding the social safety net or something, or they're not, they're basically talking about the minimum wage. And I think there was a really good piece at TPM yesterday that Josh Marshall wrote, and it was about the Democrats' problem. And it's basically that, they're trying to be the party for middle-class voters, but they don't have an answer yet. And the Republicans don't have an answer either about boosting overall wage levels, which has sort of been flat for the last 40 years. So that's something they really have to look at and think hard about, and it's not going to necessarily be easy to do. So I don't know. That's why, 10 of these people in the primary just yelling at each other until someone figures something out, instead of, Hillary Clinton just sort of standing there being like,
I'm inevitable.
Yeah.
Let's make history.
I don't know. I'm interested to hear what she has to say, to what extent she the cautious inevitabilist thing, or to what extent she actually tries to have interesting thoughts that people might be interested in. So
we'll see, I mean, if anybody's going to have a platform for pitching interesting thoughts, it's going to be Hillary 2016, right?
Yeah. I mean, it just depends on how much she wants to do that. So it'll be interesting to see if she just runs as a general election candidate from the get-go.
Yeah. In
which case it'll just be an extremely boring time, and we'll, turn our gaze to the 20-person Republican field, 25-person Republican field. I don't know. How many Republicans do you think are going to run?
Also Ben Carson.
Ben Carson, I think he should just be named president right now. Because, we talk about
all this.
Yeah, I think we know who's going to win. So yeah.
I mean, at least a shoo-in for vice presidential pick. Who wouldn't want to run with that guy?
Yeah.
They're all going to run. There's going to be so many. I think it sounds like Rubio is leaning pretty heavily towards running. It sounds like Cruz is almost definitely going to run. Sounds like Rand Paul is almost definitely going to run. I don't have any Gnostic insight on this, but my gut would be that Jeb Bush doesn't run. My gut would be that Paul Ryan does not run. I think there's a decent chance Scott Walker runs, but I haven't seen any strong indicators of that. His strong re-election is really helpful if he wants to. Yeah. But I was in Wisconsin covering him during the last couple of days of the campaign, and his people were totally mum about it. And even on election night, talking to state legislators and think tank people in Wisconsin who know him, they were all like, we don't know, maybe, we don't really know. So nobody was really boosting Walker. People weren't trying to give a hard Walker sell to national reporters.
I think a lot of people have been saying he's sort of a great paper candidate, but as a person, he's not really, a rousing figure. So I don't know how he could export that.
He's the norm core candidate.
Yeah. But then now there's all this talk. I don't know. I'm talking about 2 articles that I've read ever. So about how if Jeb Bush doesn't run, then the people who would have donated Jeb Bush are going to try to get Mitt Romney to do it again. Do you think there's any chance that happens? I've been mocking this idea for 7 months or whatever.
No, I don't think that's going to happen at all. I
don't think it is either, but I'm now at the point where I'm not just going to laugh it off entirely.
People write articles about Mitt Romney running because they get drudge hits for them, and because everyone goes, oh, Mitt Romney would be so great. Let's all relitigate the debate season of Romney and Obama. It's not going to happen. Yeah. I think what's more interesting, it's just dumb. Hopefully he won't run now, and I won't sound like a total idiot. I know. Jeez. But I think also what's interesting is Rubio's ties to Jeb Bush. I think he's from Florida, knows those guys. His staff is almost entirely culled from George W. Bush's administration. Very close with those folks. I think all the people who would back Jeb Bush or would get behind Rubio. I think he's sort of the establishment Rhino Surrender Caucus pick.
Yeah.
Hispanic, so you sort of have your, I get to make history too argument on your side if Rubio runs. very hawkish on foreign policy, kind of gone out of his way to be a foreign policy hawk, to draw a contrast between him and Rand Paul. Besides the immigration total enormous meltdown, he hasn't really had any big flubs or embarrassing moments. He doesn't say stupid things. I don't think he's ever said a stupid thing. He's really good on the stump. He's good at talking to people. Great speaker. So if I don't know, if I were somebody pining for Jeb Bush or Romney to run, like if I was a donor with like 6 figures to just throw all over the place, I'd be looking really hard at Rubio. I think he could be the guy for them.
Interesting. Yeah, I don't. Yeah, I sort of abandoned Rubio after the whole immigration debacle, but
and
I don't know, maybe he could do it.
Yeah, and justifiably so. Because that's such a disaster for the conservative base and Tea Partiers and just conservatives in general, that if he recovered from that, it would be really phenomenal. But Jeb Bush is also very soft and rhino-ish on immigration. Well,
that's why I don't really think either of them. I don't know. I think they have a lot of problems, which I think is funny. There's so many people with their checkbooks open, waiting, just throw money at Jeb Bush. But I mean, talk about a guy who needs to prove himself in a Republican primary. Like, I have no idea if anyone's going to care what this guy has to say. He may have a lot of money, but I just think it's a little interesting that people are just, I don't know, I guess sort of quietly slipping into this, the closest thing we have to a front runner slot, but there's no, I guess that's just money and name, and I don't know, I guess this general impression that he's more of a adult than the rest of the party. So, but yeah, he's going to have a lot to explain for.
Yeah, no kidding. And also, Bush supports Common Core, which is a major issue for a lot of people in the conservative base, a major issue for the Heritage Action types, major issue for a lot of the big donors to Republicans. And there's probably an interesting piece to be written about what Common Core can mean for 2016, because it's such a state-level issue. But that's been Jeb Bush's thing. He's been a very vocal proponent of it. So, I mean, I think there would be lots of emotional meltdowns and crises if Jeb Bush gets anywhere close to being the nominee. I just can't imagine a universe where that happens.
Yeah.
I think even given Rubio's, the hellscape that was Rubio's mortifying effort at immigration reform, I think even given that, he's in better shape for a potential 2016 bid than Jeb Bush would be. I think.
Yeah, probably.
I could be wrong, but that's what I think. Interesting. What do you think about Democratic primary? If you had to guess if anybody runs against Hillary, Bernie?
Bernie may run. I think Martin O'Malley will run.
Yeah, I'm trying to make Burn Baby Burns, BERN, a hashtag.
Yeah.
Okay. Nobody uses it. I think it's really clever.
Yeah, you just have to work it. Then it'll get picked up eventually, I think. But I'm like drawing a blank already. Did you read Ryan Lizzo's piece about the Democratic primary this week?
No.
Oh, okay. Yeah, this long article in the New Yorker about potential Hillary Clinton challengers, and it's a pretty thin bench. I know Jim Webb is someone who, has made some moves. The former Democratic senator for Virginia. I don't know if he'll go through with it, just because I don't know. He was in the Senate for one term and then he got bored with it, so I don't know. I don't know if he really has the focus necessarily to do a presidential campaign, or and obviously name recognition from. Although he has some interesting ideas, so. I
feel like we're kind of in the phase when
it's
former senators and governors of very tiny states make sort of little comments about it because they like getting their phone ringing off the hook from national reporters. And people go, "Oh, I don't know. Maybe I'll go visit Iowa. I don't know." It's like, I don't think Jim Webb's running for president. Probably not. But I don't know, if you're a bored retired senator, YOLO, right?
Yeah, I mean, why not?
A fun thing to do.
Yeah, it's something to do. So
interesting.
But I don't know. It's really pretty hollow. I think they're just clearing the room for Hillary.
What about Andrew Cuomo?
Ugh. I don't know.
Does anybody like him? I don't mean to be, I don't know, snarky or presumptuous, because obviously the majority of New York voters like him. But who would be like, hooray, Andrew Cuomo needs to run for president? Because I know people have talked about this, right? Like, who are the people cheerleading for him?
I don't know. I don't know if anyone's cheerleading for it. His name has sort of been dropped. I don't know if he's necessarily that interested in it.
Didn't his book sell like 500 copies or something?
Yeah, well, give him some credit. I think it was more like 900. So, but yeah, I mean, I think we maybe get a skewed version of what is for Andrew Cuomo, because at least on my Twitter timeline, the Democrats in New York are from New York City, and they think he's worse than Satan, like literally worse than Satan, and I may be inclined to agree with him, but yeah, I guess more conservative Democrats are happy with him. I just don't really see how he could survive a Democratic presidential primary.
Is there a reason that he would run, though? Like, would it put him in a position to maybe be a cabinet member or sell maybe another 3 figures worth of books?
No, I mean, I think if he ran, it would be more than just a stunt campaign. And, who knows? He may have the name recognition and obviously plenty of well-heeled donors, who are ready to put an effort behind him. But, yeah, I don't know. I don't really get the sense that he's into it.
It seems like O'Malley's into it, right?
Oh, O'Malley is way into it. O'Malley has 10 people in Iowa or something for the last 2 years.
That's amazing.
And I don't know. Yeah, I think he'll do it, but I don't know. There's got to be someone in there. Someone's got to be a foil. I don't really think there's anyone who could get Hillary run for money besides Elizabeth Warren, and she said 9 million times that she is not, going to do it.
Is she definitely not? Because I remember reading some article, and this...
I wouldn't close it out.
I remember reading some article that felt very, very wishful, where I forget who wrote this or where they wrote it, on the internet.
On the internet. There's an article on the internet, yeah.
An internet article. Where the writer was like, Liz Warren always says, I am not running for president, in the present tense. She doesn't say she won't run for president.
I remember that, yeah. That was a very close reading.
Yeah. I mean,
true. She's currently not running for president. No one is. Yeah, she can say that.
This was a good internet article. It's very, very insightful. So you think she's definitely not? You think there's no way she'd do it?
No, I think there's a way that she would do it, but I think it's unlikely.
You think what?
I think it's unlikely, just given all the denials she's done. But remember in 2012 when there were all these people who said they'd never do it, and then they just kept getting asked and asked, and I guess it sort of cuts to the point. They ended up not doing it, like Paul Ryan and Chris Christie.
Right.
Remember when all the rich people in New York, all the Republicans were like, we need Paul Ryan or Chris Christie or whatever. They just got them to think about it, well after they had given pretty Sherman-esque denials. So
Mitch Daniels,
yeah, he was another one of those, my family doesn't want me to do it, guys.
Yeah.
I always thought it was a little funny, just blame it on your family, but
you don't really like those people.
Yeah, they can deal with it. Just do it.
Just go for it. Well, interesting. It's gonna be fun. The things I'm not excited about for 2016 is the fact that there's going to be 8 million stories on Hillary that are all going to be basically the same thing, and that we're going to hear about Hillary inevitability every single day. I'm not excited about that, just because I think it's really boring. I think there's maximum oversaturation. Is not interesting. I'm already tired of reading Hillary Clinton stories. I'm not excited about that. I am excited about Ben Carson for president. I'm very excited about Martin O'Malley for president. Very excited about Bernie Sanders for president. So there's a lot to look forward to.
I guess maybe there's some at least
it's
better.
It's going to be fun. It's going to be fun to cover. It's going to be fun to see how these guys pitch themselves and who gives money to them and if they have really exciting grassroots rallies and stuff. It's going to be interesting. I'm excited about that.
Yeah, it is. Yeah, I think, probably the less we talk about Hillary, then the more, interesting it will be for everyone. But that's obviously not going to.
Yeah. So speaking of
people love to just get in our head.
Oh yeah, I know. So in the meantime, until the Ben Carson wave sweeps the nation, we have Capitol Hill, right? And then the last thing we talked about, or looked to talking about, is what could possibly happen in the next 2 years under the lame duck presidency. What do you think would be most likely and or least likely from Congress?
I think most likely to happen is probably Congress giving the administration this fast-track authority to negotiate trade deals. Like there's, this big trade deal with the Trans-Pacific Partnership that they've been working on for years and years and years that the authority that the administration wants to get done. It was something that it's something that Obama and the Republicans have sort of been more in agreement on always. But Harry Reid, when he was controlling the Senate, he's a pretty anti-free trade Democrat.
Huh.
So he wouldn't bring it up. But I think it'll probably pass now, which is just sort of, I don't know, it's just sort of fun. We have these great, populist campaigns, like talking about how we're going to help the working man or whatever. And the first thing they want to do is a freaking free trade deal. So I don't know. American politics, man. It's
also interesting that Republicans would back something that theoretically gives the executive more power and Congress less.
Right, yeah.
Right?
Yes, the tyrant Obama who cannot be trusted can apparently be trusted when it comes to fast-track authority to negotiate trade deals.
Yeah, that's super interesting.
Or, the ISIS war. I mean, it looks like they're going to have an AUF debate, which is actually something I'm really interested about the ISIS fight. But, I think they'd be fine just letting Obama do whatever he wants with the military because they sort of agree with it. So, Obama tyrant hates Congress thing sort of falls out the window there. But
it's interesting. I think that's a totally fair point.
Yeah.
That Republicans are extremely worried about, letting the imperial president do anything domestically, but when it comes to actually invading other countries, we're like, he's the president.
You need to do more, Can we get some ground troops in there?
Don't ask us.
Yeah.
It's
please.
Cool.
It's almost like it's a bit of a opportunistic talking point, the Obama tyrant thing. But who knows?
I think there's a valid argument Republicans can make saying the president has overstepped typical boundaries of the executive. I think that is a totally valid argument. But when you make that argument only on the issues where you disagree with him on, but you say, hey, you agree with me on this thing, so it's fine for you to do whatever you want, that's when there's some fun credibility problems.
Yeah. But as far as the least likely, I mean, either immigration reform or tax reform, probably tied. I'd say probably immigration reform is somehow even less likely to happen than tax reform, which is the single hardest thing to do. So, I just don't. Which is what makes all these this sort of chatter about if Obama just tables his executive action, then we can get to work on immigration reform. I think that's just so bogus. We just saw a campaign that run, which was everyone running hard against immigration reform. I mean, I just don't see. There's no way that's going to happen. I think it's possible that the Senate could try to do something and maybe get something through, but the House will have the same dilemma that it's always had.
And also the fact that Cruz and Rubio and Rand Paul are all running for president means that any sort of immigration stuff is going to be, I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, there's a million reasons why it can't happen.
Yeah.
But I did see actually this may be interesting. I saw yesterday Ron Johnson, the senator from Wisconsin, gave an interview with the Associated Press, and he's going to be the incoming chair of the Homeland Security Committee or something. And he is maybe the most vulnerable Republican in the next
I think
Senate,
so, definitely.
In the next Senate map.
I think so, yeah.
So he told the Associated Press that apparently he's going to start working on an immigration bill that will be mostly border security. But there was also, the article didn't explain very well what it was going to be, but there was also something about potentially an expanded guest worker program. So, that could be a little dynamic, that they're where you have, some of these guys who are a little worried. Now it's suddenly trying to be like, oh, yeah, let's have more guest workers. And then, you'll have Cruz and everyone else running for president, sticking to the hard line, and then nothing will happen. So.
Right. I think another fun question with all of this is just what the definition of amnesty is. Because Republicans use that as a synonym for immigration policy we don't like. And that means one thing if you're talking to FAIR or Numbers USA, where just increasing the number of immigrants who come into the United States is unacceptable. Versus if you're talking to Boehner, where it's like amnesty equals automatically giving citizenship to every single person here.
Right.
It's like there's this massive gap between what people mean when they use that word.
Yeah, I mean, in the last year, it seems to have been stretched to mean anything less than maximum deportation policy.
Right, exactly, so. Yeah. And I mean, there are people who make that argument, like Ann Coulter will make that argument. She's very influential to a lot of these super hardliners on immigration. Laura Ingraham will make that argument, yep. That anything short of constant threat of deportation for everyone in the country illegally is amnesty.
Right.
Yeah, which obviously I think the vast majority of Republicans on the Hill, or a significant majority of Republicans on the Hill, wouldn't agree with. So it's interesting. Do you hear anything about prison reform or in a sentencing reform?
That's maybe the issue where I'm most hopeful that it will eventually it will eventually happen.
Mm-hmm.
I don't. We'll see what sort of resolve there sort of is to it in the next year or so. But I think just it's one issue where you see the bipartisan coalition growing. It actually sort of makes you happy about. It's like the one thing in politics to be happy about a little bit.
Totally, yeah.
Because you just have
fuzzies.
Yeah, and it's something where it's just sort of an interesting swing from. The politics of the 80s and 90s where crime was such an issue. Mm-hmm. And now everyone's sort of looking at, like, okay, we went a little bit over the top there with these sort of, severe mandatory sentences for every drug offense. Now it's time to maybe roll it back a little bit. Mm-hmm. And I think, credit to Rand Paul. He's done a lot to sort of help popularize that on the right. And then, and Rick Perry, too, and some of these state legislatures. So there's a certain openness, I think, on the right to it, and Democrats probably feel like they can do it now without, looking like soft on crime pansies or whatever.
I think so. I think that's right.
Yeah.
Especially given Senator Lee has been really adamant about supporting prison reform, sentencing reform, and his role on judiciary, that's very helpful. And then also given that a lot of social conservatives are really active on it. Like Tony Perkins, Chuck Colson, the religious right has regular meetings at Americans for Tax Reform that Grover Norquist shows up at, where they talk about how to change sentencing reform.
Yeah.
I think it's definitely politically possible this Congress.
Yeah,
you'd think that'd be doable.
So we'll see. I mean, maybe I don't know. I just wonder if it's a little. It could still be a little premature. It may need another few years to sort of settle down. There could, when an actual bill came up that had to be voted on, the sort of old law and order instincts maybe within the Republican Party might shoot it down a little bit. You saw, in general, with sentencing reform and a lot of sort of drug war policy. Like, I mean, look at D.C. We have this, marijuana is everywhere in D.C. now. But there are already Republicans talking about trying to roll back, D.C. decriminalization and now legalization in D.C.
Yeah.
And that there was a vote on that in an appropriations bill last year, and it got like most Republican votes. So
Interesting.
I don't know, maybe a little more time before these some of these old impulses on both sides, Democrats too, who were too worried about looking soft on crime, and then they resurface again if they actually don't vote. But I'm hopeful that something will get done on this, in the near future.
Seems like it should be doable.
Yeah, it should.
Well, this was really fun.
It was fun, yeah.
Yeah, it's been a pleasure. Thanks for.
We didn't get to everything. Did we get to everything? I don't know, but
I think we got to everything. Yeah.
Okay.
I think we
covered the entirety of American politics.
Covered America. Covered everything happening in 2016. Everything that happened in the midterms. Everything on Capitol Hill.
Everything.
Pretty good whirl of lightning around.
Well, thank you for having me on.
Thanks for coming. This was a blast.
Yeah.
I'm sure I'll see you soon.
All right.
Bye.
Bye.